All right, hello everybody. Welcome to Signals in Higher Ed. I'm Darin Francis from Harbinger Lane. Today I'm joined by Jason Blackstock, the co-founder of How to Change the World. Welcome, Jason.
Darin, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, as you know, Alana and I spoke earlier this year. We touched on your origin story. We talked a little bit about some of the exciting things that you guys are doing with mass experiential learning as the term that I learned then. But I want to cue others into the genesis story of how to change the world. And I want to really invite you into this conversation we're having with other founders too about experiential learning more generally. So I'm looking forward to having this conversation.
So am I, Darin. This is a fantastic series that you're running.
Oh, thank you. So maybe let's just go back to the point that I understand. This is the point at University College London where you're founding a new department and you get handed what sounds like an impossible mandate. Talk us through what that was that sort of got you thinking about this world.
Well, so this was end of 2012, beginning of 2013, and the conversation at UCL was not that different than you find going on at universities around the world still today. The conversation went, we have all of these technically brilliant graduates that we're putting out in the world across engineering, across business, across computer science, but we're getting the same thing back from employers and alumni several years out over and over again. Technically brilliant, but no experience at figuring out how to apply that to things that matter in the workforce, the types of problems and challenges that actually you want that technical expertise to solve. And so several of the deans came and said, could you create one course that would give our students the opportunities to apply these skills to messy real world problems that they care about? And I was like, yes, this sounds awesome. This takes all of my skills and my background in Silicon Valley around sustainability. Perfect. And then they smiled at me and said, great, we only need you to do it for 1,500 students at a time, but you're a new department. You don't need new resources, right? There's a moment of deep breathing that went along with that. And yet this is a not uncommon challenge that higher ed is facing everywhere. We talk to higher ed leaders, we run roundtables with higher ed leaders, and the budget squeeze while trying at the same time to grow learning experiences is that pernicious challenge. How do you scale it? So at that point in time, this was 12 years ago, I went, all right, we have to run some experiments. And so we did a bunch of experiments. You don't have the 3 hours for this podcast for me to go through everything that we learned not to do, because there's a lot that you shouldn't do when trying to scale it. But the building blocks that we figured out for doing truly scalable experiential learning at UCL were effective enough that by 2016, it became a required capstone course for every engineering, computer science, and business degree at UCL. And that's what snowballed, and I know Alana shared this previously, that's what snowballed into others asking for versions, and eventually led us to spinning out the social enterprise so that we could scale this and help others scale these types of large scale mass experiential learning programs.
That's terrific. And yeah, you start with just what feels like a terribly unrealistic goal, under-resourced. So I guess, how did you find your way? I mean, how did you get to 1,500 students right away? Like,
short answer is we didn't. The first couple of years we were piloting it in 2013, 14, and then 14, 15 for the academic years. We didn't jump all the way up there, but we had 500. So, and the difference between 500 and 1,500 practically is not that difference. But the difference between 30 and 500, it's not just quantitatively different, it's qualitatively different. And so we had to explore a whole bunch of, how do you not look at scale as being the daunting thing, but how do you take advantage of the scale? And there's a lot of, we looked around at a wide range of pedagogies for experiential learning, from the medical schools and the Navy SEALs military side to places that you wouldn't initially think. Massive online gaming, a world which is designed to create massive experiences and designed to be better the bigger you get, not the other way around. And there's a lot of lessons that you can take from that in terms of the building blocks to think about how you build truly scalable learning through peer-to-peer learning, near-peer coaching, if some of the other building blocks. And I'm sure we'll pick those up in the conversation.
Yeah, well, we definitely need to. And I guess let me also ask this. You're especially at these early mandate, pre deciding to form a company around
Mm-hmm.
this. Um, this is a this started out as a 4 credit course, correct?
Yes. Short answer is yes.
And and then do you, knowing what you know now, do you assume that the majority of the mass experiential learning opportunities for all of these students is a 4 credit course, or does it become co-curricular in some instances? Like, and how do you know, and how does an institution make that decision, or is it really simple?
It's it's a great question, and let me unpack it in a couple of ways. Let me start by saying uh, we started as a credit bearing course because that's what we had to do when thinking about when meeting the challenge that was required to get all students engaged. That was the mandate we had at UCL. If you want all students engaged, that's not optional. That's not co-curricular. All students are motivated by, well, basically the currency is credit and grades. And so if you need all students involved from the beginning, you have to go curricular. But at the end of the day, the ultimate goal is to provide the students with the learning outcomes. And there's many ways of achieving that. We have partners around the world today who treat it extracurricularly, co-curricularly, and as curricular opportunities. But I'd go broader than that. And again, it's another theme I'm sure we'll pick up. When we started, higher education was the only focus. We were getting pulled out of UCL to engage with other higher education institutions because that's where the attraction was. But today, continuous lifelong learning, upskilling, these are imperatives for individuals, businesses, society to thrive. And for that, learning experiences or experiential learning is critical for all of those audiences. So the mental model of where education is going to be happening 10, 20, 30 years from now isn't going to match the mental model of where it was 30 years ago. It's going to be throughout life, throughout career. And things like mass experiential learning can reach those audiences and engage them, as can many different experiential learning modalities.
Yes, yes. When I'm jumping around a little bit because I see some of the companies that I speak to at maybe at earlier stage in their journey, they're trying to determine where they would bring the greatest value for, say, a micro internship or for
Mm.
a some level of experiential learning that their product will provide, an engagement with employers in some regard. And and it feels like a pretty tough place for a company to begin. You, because of your academic background, began within the academy in a credit bearing context, and um, and I guess in some ways, I wonder, I wonder if I see where you're headed now, which is we're seeing the need to support institutions where they are, and so therefore extra credit, co-curricular, or 4 credit all on the table when working with universities. Um, uh, but is it? Do you have an instinct that a
Mm.
university that wants to start doing something today with you is going to start in one route or another, or is it really individualized?
Great question. So let me actually take a step back and describe our typical interaction with a new higher education partner. It could be an engineering school, could be a business school, could be an entire college or university.
Yeah.
We almost always start with an extra or co-curricular partnership. And the reason for that is twofold. One, our model of mass experiential learning is just so different than what they're used to. And if we tried to take it directly through their curricular approvals processes, I have taken our How to Change the World credit bearing course through more academic committee approvals processes and accreditation processes than I care to remember. I'm sure my eyesight lost a few notches just going through all of that paperwork. And if you just start by diving into the curricular side without having a demonstrator for them on the extracurricular side first, it's difficult to massage that conversation. Most schools, most faculties of any discipline aren't that progressed in their understanding of experiential learning. And this goes to the second reason that we start with a package that's extracurricular and has a train the trainer component to it. We include an experiential educator fellowship program and on top of as part of the partnerships so that they have students who get the experience and they get to see it happen. And we put educators through a fellowship process where they understand the pedagogy. One of the biggest challenges that higher ed is facing right now. I did my PhD in quantum physics and engineering physics. I worked in Silicon Valley. And when I showed up at university to teach, I had exactly zero training in teaching. All I had seen was other physics professors who stood at the chalkboard and wrote things down and then eventually stopped mumbling and turned back and says, here's your exam. That's not good preparation to do experiential learning, to craft and run experiential learning. And deans, presidents, provosts of universities who recognize they need to move towards experiential learning also recognize their faculty aren't there yet. So that's why we do the two-pronged approach, the demonstrator plus the train the trainer program. And then once they have that, that's where the possibilities open up. Do you want to go curricular? Do you want to stay extracurricular, but you're going to build your own internally and we can support you with that? Or there's a multiplicity of directions to go once they have the demonstrated example and a little bit of training in order to be able to do it, to have that understanding.
Got it. That's super helpful. And I think we'll probably still come back to this in the one of the things that I'm seeing in the experiential learning space, talking to founders of all different kinds of companies, is that that regardless of where you are in the world, to your point already, experiential learning is new, and or in most cases it's new, and so I think it would be helpful right now, though, to sort of unpack how to change the world different? Like what in what is, and talk about why the bar is mass experiential learning. You already kind of hinted at this, that there's this ability once you get to a certain size to really view experiential learning differently. So help us sort of unpack mass experiential learning in the face of really credible, great non-mass experiential learning that's maybe more individualized. That's like the internship, the apprenticeship, those types of things. Give me that continuum and why How to Change the World has sort of focused in so much on that initial use case you had.
And let me just say, as a framing point that's probably worth coming back to, I think we need not only all the different models of experiential learning that are currently on the table, but we need about 10x those number of models because of the demand for experiential. You're right, experiential learning exists and has existed for a while, but the sheer scale of need is going up 100x, 1000x with AI, with content now being something that can be absorbed in many different ways. It changes the need for higher ed and lifelong learning to be more experiential. Now, with that, let me start with a basic definition. When we say experiential learning, it helps to have a starting definition. So we keep ours brutally simple. Learning by doing with clear learning objectives and effective educational scaffolding. Now, those three components are important because it's the clear learning objectives and the educational scaffolding that differentiates experiential learning from the more random situation of simply learning by experience. And the two are not synonymous. Learning by experience is a much more random approach. And there's all sorts of, there are great examples of really well executed internships, micro internships, full internship programs that have the learning objectives and the scaffolding. There's also a lot of examples of just work placements that frankly have no educational outcomes, no educational scaffolding, and the result is a mixed bag of experience. And so I start with that because if we don't have a baseline for what defines good experiential learning, it's going to be hard then to talk about mass versus notch. But let's take as a baseline that good experiential learning has those components: learning outcomes, scaffolding. The surface layer to what makes mass different is, well, you pointed out, the numbers. A mass experiential learning program is one that can engage hundreds or even thousands of learners at a time in synchronous and asynchronous experiential processes. Now, that isn't 100 or 1,000 different internships, because that is a different way of scaling experience. This is the 100 or 1,000 are all in the same program, and there's engagements between them. And this is what leads to the qualitative difference. When you have hundreds or thousands of learners, especially when they're scattered all around different geographies, different institutions, different disciplines, which is what we have the pleasure of being able to bring together, then what emerges are new opportunities from learning that simply aren't there when you only have 30 people in the same institution. The sheer volume of backgrounds, perspectives expands dramatically. And so you can scaffold and create more very valuable peer-to-peer learning interactions all throughout that program, and interactions between groups of peers and groups of mentors that you bring in and near-peer coaches. And it's layering those things together that, again, I'll go back to the gaming example that I used, ultimately build something that gets better with more people and gets less costly per person the larger you go, which is the opposite of what you get with a lot of the traditional programs.
Absolutely. That makes a great amount of sense. Now, I guess what it makes me think about is, are there are there particular programs that are sort of the sweet spot for mass experiential learning? Or as you've been doing this now for a number of years, are there programs you just thought, geez, we would never have thought it would have worked here, and it does? And just help me understand your evolution across different types of programs and where the magic happens programmatically.
Let me give you what I see as being the key building blocks that end up creating a highly effective mass experiential learning program. And
Okay.
there are many things that can fit within these building blocks. But I've alluded to a couple of them already that are applicable candidly across disciplines, across types of programs. A scaffolded and supported peer-to-peer learning structure. And now there are great examples of this being used in physics on problem-based learning environments at MIT, at Harvard, that flipped classroom type models. So there's lots of ways of doing scaffolded peer-to-peer problem-based learning. The next layer, though, to make it truly scalable is if you just have peer-to-peer, that gets to a certain point where you need that next layer of support. And your traditional TA mode or professor mode is what often caps the ability to scale it. This is where effectively trained near-peer coaches and guides come in order to help make it even more scalable in terms of how many people you can have in that process. Um, a third piece that isn't necessary to make it work, but adds the real world element that just develops the richness of the learning experience, are engaged real world mentors and experts. And one of the things that I often hear from the partners we have when we have faculty members and others who come to our educator fellowship is, yeah, but how do you find all of these mentors and experts? Well, when you structure and scaffold the interactions right, those mentors and experts are learning more from the experience themselves than they feel they're giving. In other words, they're getting a free educational opportunity to engage in this environment, and which is helping them continue to develop an upskill. We have to beat them off with a stick. because we end up with that value exchange being in both directions. And if you scaffold it well, again, it ends up with them benefiting as much or more from the experience as what they're bringing. And this gets to the fourth building block that, at least from our experience, makes it truly scalable. Embedding those first three elements inside a challenge-based learning environment, and I'll explain what I mean by that, but a challenge-based learning environment enables students and inspires mentors and experts to want to engage. And what I mean by a challenge-based learning environment is if you craft a narrow problem, apply physics to building this particular widget, or solve this particular business problem in an industry, you'll end up with a certain fraction of students and a certain fraction of real world mentors who are enthused by that narrow challenge, but everyone else is like, well, I'll do it because it's an assignment, not so interesting. But our world is filled with social, economic, environmental challenges galore that people feel motivated to want to tackle. And when we frame the challenge that students are tackling, that the learners are tackling, that the mentors are supporting, a step higher than any particular narrow challenge, it creates scope for learner agency, it creates scope for mentor agency. And in that environment, you end up with that reinforcing loop going through the peer-to-peer learning, the near-peer coaches, and the mentors. And that's what lights the fire. And the challenges can be, and we've done it on, we tend to focus on social, environmental, and economic, but we've used engineering grand challenges. We've used recoupling social and economic purpose. We've used themes from across a wide range of disciplines that allow people to engage and see themselves and what they can bring within a narrow piece that they have agency to choose.
Very powerful. Um, I'm getting the sense that the scale to which you can do this programmatically is becoming somewhat limitless, and it's actually somewhat important to, in order to get some of the benefit, you actually kind of need to push this out into a lot of different contexts. You need sort of, which is also this component that you bring to it, which I find fascinating but equally complex in my mind, is this multi-institutional perspective. So now maybe help us understand a real world example of this, where you've got all the building blocks firing all on all cylinders. But somehow you've managed to bring people together from not just different geographies, but different institutions. And so walk us through like how that even happens, how you get people to agree, and because incentives are certainly aligned. I get that. But it's you're also getting people to agree across institutions, but you're also getting people from different time zones and everything involved in this. So help us unpack it in a real world scenario from your experience.
Perfect. Let me start with some of the incentive pieces that you talked about there, because I think these are important to understand. And then I'll just talk through a very specific one, an extracurricular program that we completed just 2 weeks ago with students from, what was it, 34 universities across 25 countries or something like that. I'll have to pull up the exact number, but and that's a standard extracurricular program for us to run. Yes, we have the privilege of working across all those institutions, but I think one of the things that I want people to take away is, even within an institution, there is tremendous diversity already. Disciplines are, to some extent, it's often funny, when we run these big programs, we get a lot of questions and we see a lot of learning for the students around intercultural competencies. It's one of the areas we see the biggest spikes in terms of students going, I've never had a chance to work with people from another country, never mind 12 different countries, and engage with them all throughout this process. And yet, time and again, what we find is the bigger cultural barriers that have to be coached and overcome isn't between someone from the Middle East and Latin America or Asia and North America. It's between an engineer and a business student. because they have been taught entirely different languages, all English, but not at all meaning the same things when using the same words and talk. And we do this in academic silos incredibly well within our institutions and organizations. And it's one of the challenges students have when they go out into the workforce is they've been trained in a language of a discipline. And when they go out there and engage, they're needing to figure out how to translate that across disciplines. And so the original program that I built at UCL, we were not doing it with other institutions, but we were doing it across disciplines. And you still see that depth of growth. And so the examples that we're able to run working across institutions are sort of like the Rolls-Royce version. And there's a lot of reason why students and mentors are willing to get up at 3 a.m. to engage, because it's a global networking, a global virtual mobility opportunity that is rare. But even when you just bring it down within an institution, it's a rare opportunity to be able to work across disciplines on messy real world problems and learn how to do that communication. And so the way it unfolds for us is the basic building blocks, going back to the ones that I laid out. First thing we do is we get students from all these diverse backgrounds and we stick them in teams. We stick them in teams of 3, 4, or 5 students, but they're in a cohort of 25 to 40 other teams, and they're all given a big, messy challenge. And we leverage a knowledge of their passions to align them so they're as diverse as possible, except shared passions. And that becomes an anchor point. And happy to talk about why we lean towards passions, why we call it how to change the world as an inspirational thing. Happy to pick that up. But we build it in that way in those small teams because that's where the learning happens. That's the peer-to-peer. And then we scaffold it with the near-peer mentor or the near-peer coaches. And those are people who have been through the process before, our own alumni that we put through a train the trainer. And from there, we layer on top of it the real world mentors and the real world community representatives in a very structured series of interactions and a pedagogy that is scaffolded around human-centric design thinking, systems thinking, etc. And it's that structure of how we do the interactions that ends up creating all the value. It means you don't need a professor at the front of the classroom for every 30 or 40 people. You need one person to guide the 1,000 people while you have all the coaches and mentors who are supporting along the way.
This might seem like an out of order question, but you're talking to a dean who has not, they're just hearing of what you're doing. They're considering, it at their institution. What problem do they believe they're solving when they come to you or they sign up? Because you've just hit on so many different potential benefits. I'm just curious, like, what is the core? Do they have a core problem that they're trying to solve? It's not necessarily experiential learning initially, right? It could be a myriad of things.
It's a great question, Darin, and I think there is not a one size fits all where every dean articulates the problems in the same way, or every president and provost articulates the problem in the same way. What we tend to find from all of these conversations is I would bucket it into 3 large groups of problems that reasons why deans go, yes, this is really valuable. The first one goes back to what I was talking about with faculty. Deans recognize that their faculty, the vast majority of faculty, are not resisting experiential learning. They're not trying to go against the grain and say, no, I want to teach with acetates and slides, and I just want to go back to that. But what they're lacking are examples. You cannot create what you cannot imagine. It's a beautiful quote by Lucille Clifton. Most faculty members have never been given the opportunity to imagine what it's like. They've never been exposed to experiential learning. And so that in and of itself, when a dean is looking and going, I know my students need more real world experiences. That's what we're getting from all of this feedback. How do I do it? How do I help my faculty develop the skills to do this? They look at it and go, oh, wait a minute. You've got a train the trainer program and a demonstrator. Yes, I'm in. And that's the institutions that are grappling with how do we get going on this journey. Some already have good experiential learning foundations built in. You've got co-op programs, you've got internship type programs, you've got others, but they're also, though in that group, they've got a foundation, but they're like, it's costing me a lot to try and scale this and do this for everybody. There's got to be a more effective way. And there it's the conversation, well, how do I scale it? Well, okay, I can see that you've scaled it. Let's have that conversation about how to scale it. The third group is the group that are already driving. This is the smallest group, I would say, that is driving forward large experiential learning programs. But they sit back and they go, but our students still want more. We've got a baseline of great experiential learning, and we're still seeing our normal lectures emptying out, which means we need to think about how do we expand and scale that. And they're looking for more options to add, more variations to add. As I say, those are rare. I can probably count them on 1 to 2 hands, the number out of the portfolio of almost 100 we work with. But those ones still, it goes back to my earlier point. The experiential learning is only going to explode in the coming decades because that's the only way in which we can effectively learn in a world where content and AI, the content is freely available. There's a lot of content that can be absorbed. AI tools are brilliant at coaching individuals on how to absorb that content if it's used for that rather than just as a crutch. But all of that leads towards then our role as educators and institutions is creating the environment for experiences that allow you to take that content and apply it to things that you're passionate about, to things that you care about, to things that make a difference.
The point of realizing that mass experiential learning has a place across the curriculum, that this is truly in the interdisciplinary studies realm of things. And I wonder about you're originally from North America, from Canada. You spent quite a bit of time in the US. You know the Canadian system well, you know the UK system well, and I'm sure you've got a pretty strong sense for how the US higher ed system works. In the US, we have a fairly fragmented system. We have the haves and the have-nots of higher ed, as any country does. But we also have segments of higher education, from elite institutions to maybe small to medium-sized regional institutions. And what I wonder about is, as you've encountered just different use cases working with different types of universities, um, are there university profiles that stand out as you're surprised to see them involved? Are there types of institutions that you thought, oh, I didn't realize we'd be reaching this type of an institution now? Or do you find it, yeah, how do you find the the total addressable market uh, in terms of
It's a
institutions
great
and
question.
institution types?
Let me ask, I'll answer that in a subtly different way in a minute, but let me just answer it straight on. I think I've been surprised how uh, we're not seeing a profile of institution that emerges as dominant. In other words, we're seeing the full spectrum of profiles hungry for a conversation about what the future of higher education looks like, and how to integrate better learning experiences into their programs. And a piece of that is looking very actively at experiential learning and all of the building blocks that make up even basic experiential learning, active learning, peer-to-peer learning, social learning, et cetera, et cetera. And so, whereas it's been almost a decade since we even started the journey to go beyond UCL's borders. So we didn't spin out as a social enterprise until 2019. But in those first 3 years, we were already getting requests outside of UCL to do it. And I was surprised by the diversity of places we were getting it from. I think the place that has surprised me the most in the last couple of years, when we have been engaging with institutions in different continents, we are now getting more and more of them saying, well, it's great that you do it for our undergrads. Now you've been doing it for our master's students. We've got these exec masters over here. Could we integrate them into the program? And we've gone, sure, we'll give it a try. And we're actually seeing even bigger spikes in learning for them. And it's one of those things where it has made us aware, and our mentor community that has been coming and engaging. These are mid-career and senior career professionals, even retirees who are coming to mentor the students. And they're giving us the feedback, I'm learning an amazing amount from this. How can I do more? How can I get more engaged? How can I learn more from this process? And what it's making us recognize is actually we've crafted our mental models around what higher education is and the audience that it is serving in a way that frankly was more accurate at the beginning of the last century than it'll be by the middle of this century, or even now. It's a much more diversified demographic of learner today. And so for the business speak aspect of the total addressable market, it got a heck of a lot bigger when we started looking at it that way. And we're realizing actually there's learning and development within corporations. There's a variety of ways to look at this for tackling societal challenges. That this isn't a mass experiential learning for higher ed only. Higher ed is one of the places, but higher ed is blurring that line and needs to blur that line of how it engages learners across all demographics.
Yeah, now we're getting into your initial thesis around lifelong learning, and I'm glad you brought up the L&D side of the corporate world. Are you doing work today in that space?
We are actively building pilots now because, and again, it's kind of like we spun out from UCL because we had enough requests that my faculty were like, we have day jobs, we can't do this anymore. So like, you want to keep expanding it, you got to spin it out. So we spun it out. We've been working with higher ed, it's been growing, and now our mentors are like, this is great, but we've got all these people I hired already, and we need to keep learning and developing. So we've been engaging some of that community with saying, okay, help us. While the audience is different, the modes of engagement need to be different for those different audiences. The fundamental pedagogy doesn't change. The wealth learning by doing with clear learning objectives and a well scaffolded process, just done at large scale so that it is accessible and affordable. Those are the building blocks. So we're exploring what that looks like, and we're expecting in 26 we'll be doing our first public pilots there.
That's exciting. Well, I'm going to want to check in with you on that at some point and learn um, about the learnings from that space, which I can imagine would be very powerful. Um, I was in a conversation earlier this week with some other founders in the higher ed space, trying to do some interesting work, innovation in different areas of higher ed. And as often comes up is we're at this point of crisis in higher education. There's an identity crisis. What do we want to be when we grow up as higher ed? And I'm just curious from your perspective. You're a real evangelist, not just for how to change the world, but for experiential learning. You come at it from a very thoughtful pedagogical perspective, but you've built something here. You've really gotten to a level of scale. When you step out of your role as running how to change the world as an organization, and you just
Mm-hmm.
look at higher ed and the crisis that we're in, does it feel to you like you're at the epicenter with experiential learning? And I don't, and it could be truly, you could say there's these other things that are more
Yeah.
central to solve right now for higher ed to sort of see its way into the future. But I'm curious, when you just think about the crisis that we see in higher ed, how do you view it?
It's a fantastic question. Um, and I think uh, the biggest challenge, let me frame it this way. If we started with a blank sheet of paper and tried to design a system that would take people after grade 12 and provide them with the educational, the learning opportunities that they need to be productive, engaged, fulfilled, thriving citizens and employees and business creators, et cetera, throughout life, in a world where technology is evolving not decadally, not even annually, but monthly at the moment, would it look anything like the current model? The short answer is probably not. And there's a variety of underlying challenges there that are why the current system wouldn't be what we would design. One of them goes back to something I said earlier. Faculty aren't trained to teach. I don't get me wrong. There are many brilliant faculty members out there who have become phenomenal teachers. But that's after getting a PhD in a field where you were trained to be an expert in that narrow thing, and then you learned how to teach if you were passionate about it afterwards. That was fine when we were educating 1% of the population as higher education 200 years ago. It's not scalable to a model of educating half or all of the population with the skills and opportunities they need in providing that life. So there is an issue of how we prepare all these brilliant minds in higher research to be leaders in higher education. And that is where the I do think there are two things that are coming together at the same time. One is AI. There's no question that AI, which eats content for breakfast and spits out a model designed to individually coach you in that content for lunch. Well, in that world, the traditional model of faculty lecturing is just dying, and it needs to die, because why would you give a lecture more than once when the AI can then summarize it and do it better for you, provide the coaching and the support for each student on what they didn't get from it? In that world, though, the most important thing is humans becoming exceptionally good at what only humans can do, which includes the social and emotional learning and interaction. And that is all about learning experiences. Is experiential learning one form of learning experience? Absolutely. It is sort of a pinnacle type opportunity that allows students, when done well, to engage in messy real world problems. But I'm not going to take a grade 1 student and stick them trying to solve a message. Even a first year undergrad, you need a combination of active learning, problem based learning, learning methods that when you add them up, and micro internships and all sorts of other forms of experiential learning, that as you build them together become the ladder of opportunity. Um, I love being able to build one version of experiential learning that's scalable. We get to work with so many students from around the world and see the learning outcomes they have and see what they go on to do and create sustainably focused companies and win Forbes 30 under 30 awards. And like, it's fantastic to see that impact. But it's also fantastic to see all of the impact that the other models of experiential learning, from, as you mentioned, micro internships, work-based learning opportunities, those are also transformational. And it's at its core, we need to rethink education, higher education and life learning in particular, as not being about content and what's the content we're delivering, but how are we shaping the experience around that content to be cognitively and affectively, emotionally transformative for the person.
I like that. And I'm sorry to hang you out there on such a big, lofty question. But I feel like I feel like what excites me the most about conversations in this space is just the the transformative power is evident at every turn. You have amazing stories of uh, transformative success for participants you going through these experiences, as do those who run micro internships or other types
Yep.
of work integrated learning. And um, so there's something really significant here. But the piece that I was sort of asking you to solve really is sort of almost around the level of like, what is the meaning? What is the purpose of higher ed? And I think, you know, and how aligned is this? It's, to me, what you're doing with mass experiential learning, what we're talking about with experiential learning, is at the crux of of the change that needs to happen in in order to adapt to where higher ed should be in the future, in order to sustain itself and to be a part of this greater societal mission you were speaking to, right?
Completely agree. I will say, Darin, that's one of the reasons we call ourselves How to Change the World. It's not exactly a modest title to begin with, but there's two layers to it that I think touch on that point of what's the purpose of higher ed. The first is philosophical, but it's grounded in the Margaret Mead quote: "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that
Mm,
ever has." We believe that. We see it. We see it in students in our programs, in alumni from our programs, demonstrating that every day. And it's a big reason why we're motivated to come to work and engage. I've also seen, though, that that's the reason most inspired educators within higher education are showing up, or for that matter, even in K to 12. They're showing up because they believe it really does have the possibility to have an impact that will give people the opportunity to be thoughtful, committed citizens and to find their tribe, their group to making change in the world. And this gets to the pedagogical side of why we call ourselves How to Change the World. It's inspirational, it's empowering, which is what education should be. That's the purpose. And it's you only need to look at the news today to see plenty of the sources of existential stress that is out there: economic disruptions, environmental catastrophes, social fracturing. But we know from neuroscience, from learning sciences, if your brain is flooded with cortisol, stress hormone, you're not going to retain information as well. You're not going to form good neural connections. Like the opportunity for learning massively decreases. Higher ed has the potential to give people hope. It should give them hope. It should give them the opportunity to see that work and education is about more than survivable. And we know there's data out there that shows upcoming, well, not only upcoming generations, current generations are increasingly driven to find purpose-driven work that helps make the world a better place. And neuroscience shows when you create the environments that are aspirational and inspirational, it creates a much better environment, the cocktail of neurochemicals that actually helps people learn better and leads to better outcomes and leads to that transformation. And I think that gets back to, it's why anything from micro internships to work integrated learning to mass experiential learning to models of experiential learning that still need to be built and developed to provide enough opportunity for the 265 million people in the world who are in some form of higher education today. All of it is about providing that hope, that aspiration, that way of taking what you have learned on content and applying it to do something that gives you a sense of empowerment and therefore drives you forward.
and it's how to change the world. I mean, I love it. This has been really great. You and I have had a few conversations, but each time I come away with another nugget of how to consider the real opportunity that there is here to make transformative moves in the market today when it comes to higher ed. I have a I guess I have a practical question for you, and it's one I would imagine you kind of get every day, and it's, so when a dean or a provost or a president is coming to you, and or you're in a conversation with them and they want to move in this direction, um, what's the first thing to do if they've not already developed a significant practice? Uh,
The
yeah, which
so
most
for
haven't.
us, that's when we're talking with them, we obviously say, well, here's the simple partnerships that we start with to give the exposure and a little bit of the training for your faculty, and it's through giving your students an experience. So your students get the benefit, and as a result, you as an institution and specifically some faculty develop an understanding of the hows. And that's our basic partnership model. That's how we approach things, because it's as much about building the broader capacity as it is us building out our partnerships and the opportunities to run these programs for students. And that's honestly where I find most institutions starting with all of the challenges, whether it's in North America, Canada, the US, in UK, Europe, Australia. There's most markets in the quote unquote Western world in higher ed. Higher education institutions are under a lot of strain right now. And in those environments, it's how can you quickly get support with an example and some experience yourself. In other parts of the world where higher ed is growing rapidly because there is a demographic demand for it and a need, Asia, Latin America, it's a different market, a different environment. And in those environments, it is, again, they're still struggling with how do we get an example so that we can think about how to scale it. And it all comes down to a demonstrator with their students that comes with training for their staff.
Yeah, it's very practical, and I really appreciate that the model that you guys deploy is as much about providing the framework and the support for an institution and for faculty to do this on their own as it is helping them do it and doing it with them. I think there's a unique opportunity for other companies that come along that are, as you say, we need 100-fold companies
Yep.
in this space doing this kind of work. I think I think your model is something that a lot of companies could really benefit from adopting, where because I think there's a fear of value extraction on the part of the academy, right? Where it's like
Yeah,
if all I do is hire a bunch of vendors to scale this and I don't figure out how to make this happen our own way, we're we're just we're sort of giving up. And I think
we're just
we're
a
sort of giving up.
storefront
And I think,
for the same stuff that's being sold everywhere else.
yeah, I really think more companies need to think about growing their businesses in a similar way to what you guys have brought together here. It's an excellent model, really is.
It's been highly effective, and it's as we talked about briefly before, and I know you talked about it a little bit with Alana. Um, we've had to build our own technology stack in order to deliver these types of programs. There just aren't things out there that do this. We've been our own customer. Like we built it for us so that we could deliver this and demonstrate this. And now we're getting those asks about that looks good. Could we, or like, how do we get that? And we're like, oh, turns out we have to build it a little bit differently if we're going to have a whole bunch of institutions on it rather than just our own programs. But that's also, I think, a mental model uh, for anyone in experiential learning. It's not just about being a broker of experiences. It's how do you demonstrate those experiences and provide it as a value development for the institution to figure out how to make it their own, and then enable them to do that, because that's that at the end of the day, higher education, the people there are passionate for helping their students, recognizing that they know their students better than any of us do because they're there day in, day out with their students. How do we enable them and support them with serving their students the best way they know how?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, I wanna be sensitive to your time. This has been a great conversation. Um, I'm curious, what question should I have asked that I didn't yet, Jason? Because I feel like I've taken you all over this world that you're in. But did we miss anything so far?
I don't think so. I think we covered the only thing that I would love to repeat, because I think it bears repeating. At first, I love what you are doing just developing this podcast series and having all of these examples showcased together, because I think it showcases just how much there is already great things out there. And it also showcases just how much potential there is to grow and scale impactful, transformative learning experiences. I think the other piece that bears repeating, though, is higher ed is in crisis, and it's a crisis that isn't just a result of ChatGPT coming out and disrupting the whole thing. It's a more systemic issue. But ChatGPT, followed by all of these tools, is accelerating what was already the trend of content becoming commoditized, and the need for higher ed to therefore move towards really human to human, grounded, interactive learning experiences. And the models of experiential learning that are out there already, from ours to others, are great examples of what is possible. And I can't wait to have a conversation 10 years from now when we look and we actually do have 10x the amount, at least, of, if not 100 by then, the amount of experiential learning that's going on.
Yeah, well said. I think it's what we need, and I'm glad you're a big part of it, and I'm looking forward to more and more of your success. How can people learn more about how to change the world? What's the best way to get a hold of you and Alana?
Best way is howtochangetheworld.org. That's our main site. And you can always reach out to us on LinkedIn, Jason Blackstock, Alana Heath. We'd love to connect. And we're always looking for collaborations and partnerships to expand and grow the sheer volume of experiential learning that's out there. So please reach out no matter what sector or continent you happen to be part of.
Perfect. Well, Jason, I can't thank you enough. It was a wonderful experience having this conversation, and I look forward to continuing this conversation well into the future as well.
Darin, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure.